If you haven't seen my videos on the history of the 1st to 5th decades AD, make sure to check those out before you start this. The link will be in the description. This is a compilation of the Yearly History series on my channel, where we cover the history of the world every year. Let's get started. Kicking off the year with a flurry of action on the island of Britannia. You'll remember back during the initial invasion by the Romans, ordered by Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, that the king of the Cativalani, Caratacus, along with his coalition of other Briton tribes, were defeated in battle and retreated towards the Midlands to continue his military action at a later date. He has recently joined forces with the Silures, who inhabit the western part of the island and are one of the defiant tribes resisting Roman advancement. The Roman governor of Britannia, Publius Astorius Scapula, is looking to end this resistance once and for all. He finally catches up to Caratacus on the banks of the river Severn, and reportedly wins a glorious victory, capturing his wife and daughter, although Caratacus himself is able to escape. He flees north and seeks refuge among the Brigantes tribe. The Brigantian queen, Cartamandua, depends on Rome for her political position and does her duty by handing over Caratacus to the Romans in chains. The Briton king and his family are immediately sent to Rome to be displayed in a military triumph in front of Emperor Claudius and the Roman masses. Normally, the captured prisoners would be executed at the end of the triumphal ceremony, but Caratacus delivers a moving speech which persuades Claudius to spare him and his family, allowing them to live free in Rome. Moving to the Caucasus, where turmoil once again erupts in the Roman client kingdom of Armenia. We saw in 35 AD how the Iberians to the north intervened in Armenia, and with the backing of the Romans placed an Iberian prince named Mithridates, also a brother of King Pharasmanes of Iberia, on the throne. He was briefly deposed from 37 to 42 AD, but was made king once again, and is still currently reigning. 16 years later, the stage is set once again for a major intervention in the kingdom. The eldest son of Pharasmanes of Iberia is Radamistus, known for his ambition, valor, extraordinary strength, size of body, and good looks. Concerned that his son intends to seize the Iberian throne for himself, Pharasmanes devises a plan to redirect his ambition by urging him to march south and claim the Armenian crown from Mithridates. To conduct reconnaissance on his uncle, Radamistus travels to the court of Mithridates under the guise of being in a feud with his family. With this crucial intelligence, he returns to Iberia to prepare his invasion. At the head of a large army provided to him by his father, Radamistus suddenly invades, forcing Mithridates to take shelter in the fortress of Gornius. Seeing that his options are limited, Mithridates eventually surrenders to his nephew after Radamistus promises that he will not harm him either by sword or poison. After his uncle arrives, Radamistus has him arrested and put into chains, then remembering his promise, has him smothered to death. Mithridates was an ally to Rome, but they decide not to intervene. However, the Roman governor of Cappadocia, Pelagius, invades Armenia and ravages the country. That is where we pause the situation until we catch up on the events in Parthia, where a possible conspiracy is afoot. The hated Gotarzes II, the son of the long-reigning Artabanus II, dies this year after an 11-year reign, wherein he constantly fought hard to keep his position. His death is thought to have been possibly the result of a conspiracy within the rival factions at his court. His immediate successor is the King of Media, who takes the regnal name of Vonones II. In short order, he also dies, leaving his son, Vologases, as the new king of the Parthian Empire. As a prince of the Arsacid dynasty, he should have a solid claim to rule for now, and hopefully for the Parthians return stability to the empire. Without wasting time, he looks to make a name for himself by setting his sights on the turmoil in the unstable Armenian kingdom with its new king, Radamistus, who is currently attempting to establish his new rule. As the year ends in this part of the world, Vologases assembles a large Parthian army to move into Armenia to extend Parthian influence. Last we heard of Punu, the Chanyu of the northern Xiongnu. He was forced to retreat north across the Gobi Desert along with his supporters in 49 AD. This year, in a heavily weakened position, he sends out envoys to meet with Han officials in the Wu Wei commandery. They are turned away, but Punu is desperate and is not willing to take no for an answer and plans to continue his pleas to the Han dynasty. In the Imperial Han court itself, Crown Prince Zhuang distinguishes himself as being perceptive. He impresses his father, the now 56-year-old Emperor Guangwu, with his assessments of the Xiongnu, demonstrating that the future of the empire looks to be in the right hands. He is in fact the one who convinced his father to turn away Punu's envoys, making the claim that the northern Xiongnu had only made the proposal to alienate their rival, the southern Xiongnu, from the Han. In the south, the indigenous Ailo people who inhabit the mountainous terrain of the southern border surrender voluntarily to the Han dynasty through a decision by their tribal king. 2,770 households and 17,659 individuals are officially registered by the Han authorities as the year ends with a successful peaceful submission. Last year in Roman Britannia, we saw the governor Publius Astorius Scapula triumphing over the Silures and capturing the rebel king of the Catuvallani, Caratacus, who was in turn sent to Rome as a captive to be displayed in a military triumph. Unfortunately for Scapula, the Silures have not been subdued and continue their resistance against the Romans. He recognizes the threat that they pose to Roman authority on the island and declares that they need to be exterminated at once to fully pacify the region. In Silurian territory, a large Roman legionary force occupying a local fort is surrounded and attacked. They are only rescued with great difficulty and at a considerable loss. The Silures had been galvanized by Astorius' threats to destroy them, and they begin taking Romans as hostages. But to the glee of the Silures, Governor Scapula suddenly dies, leaving a vacancy in Roman leadership on the island. The Silures continue their raids for the rest of the year, defeating another legion in battle, as Aulus Didius Gallus, an experienced administrator and politician, arrives to take up the office of Governor of Britannia with the goal of restoring order. As the year ends on the island, Gallus prepares his coming counterattack. Over in Rome, Emperor Claudius is making preparations for a very ambitious engineering project. He looks towards the Fucine Lake in central Italia with the goal of controlling its water levels. The lake, lacking a natural outlet, frequently floods surrounding areas, causing agricultural and health issues. The plan is to construct a drainage tunnel through Monte Salviano, aiming to divert excess water into the Liri River. A project of this magnitude will surely require tens of thousands of laborers. In approximately this year, the renowned Roman author Pliny the Elder writes his account of the wars against the Germanic tribes in his Bella Germania. Having spent time along the border region in Germania, his experiences are a valuable asset in his writings of the subject. Up until this time, his love of literature has attracted the attention and friendship of other men of letters in the higher ranks, with whom he will establish crucial partnerships to advance his career. Also around the same time, the tutor of young Nero, the philosopher Seneca the Younger, publishes one of his most famous works. The tragedy Agamemnon retells the story of King Agamemnon's return to Mycenae after the Trojan War, where he is murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus, as revenge for his sacrifice of their daughter. The play explores themes of guilt, vengeance, and the destructive cycles of familial violence, emphasizing human passion and moral corruption. Checking back in on Paul the Apostle, who has now completed his second missionary journey. In his first, he visited major sites of the eastern Mediterranean such as Cyprus and Antioch with his companion Barnabas, wherein they preached and intervened in church disputes. His second missionary journey started in 49 AD after leaving the First Apostolic Council in Jerusalem behind. During this second mission, he was joined at times by companions such as Timothy and Silas and Luke the Evangelist. They preached throughout Galatia and founded churches in numerous cities. In the city of Philippi, Paul and Silas were even imprisoned for a time after Paul supposedly cast out a spirit from a slave girl, ruining her owners' profits from her fortune-telling. On this journey, he also wrote his Epistle to the Galatians, in which he defended his apostolic authority and emphasized that salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, not through adherence to the Mosaic law, supporting the separation of Christianity and Judaism. He also spent time in other major Greek cities such as Thessalonica and Athens, where he was constantly met with hostility by the local Jewish population because of his upending of the established order and his actions converting many to Christianity. In Corinth, he remained for 18 months and wrote the first and second epistles to the Thessalonians, in which he encouraged the fledgling Christian community to remain steadfast in faith amid persecution and provided clarification and reassurance about the second coming of Christ. Paul eventually left Corinth to visit Ephesus and finally ends up in Antioch. Last year in the Caucasus, we saw the restless and ambitious Iberian prince, Radamistus, invading Armenia with an army provided to him by his father, King Pharasmanes, and capturing his uncle, Mithridates. Radamistus had his uncle killed and usurped the throne of Armenia from him. A rogue Roman commander subsequently invaded the kingdom and ravaged the country in the midst of the turmoil. As a result, the new king of the Parthians, Vologases, believed he had a pretext for war with the throne of Armenia being taken. At the end of the year, he prepared a large army to invade the kingdom. This year, the invasion kicks off with the goal of taking the throne from Radamistus and placing the brother of Vologases on the throne, Tiridates. Radamistus, as a foreign ruler of Armenia, has not had the necessary time to consolidate his rule after the usurpation and damage done by the Romans, so his position is quite tenuous. According to certain Christian traditions, a monumental step is achieved in the pursuit of spreading the religion. One of the former disciples of Jesus, Thomas the Apostle, is said to have reached the subcontinent of India on a missionary journey as part of the Great Commission. Thomas supposedly reaches the Malabar coast, where he begins preaching the gospel. There, he establishes Christian communities among local populations. In the capital city of Rome, important matters within the imperial family are developing. After adopting Nero in 50 AD, Claudius has continuously been pressured by his wife and the mother of Nero, Agrippina the Younger, to further advance her son's position in the empire. This year, Nero is set to marry someone who will allow just that. He marries Claudia Octavia, the eldest daughter of Emperor Claudius. This marriage strengthens Nero's claim to succession further by tying him even more closely to the imperial bloodline. However, Claudius already has a biological son with his former wife, that being the young Britannicus. With Nero's new imperial marriage, it is made quite clear that Claudius has been moved to cast his own son to the side in favor of Nero. Emperor Claudius also continues his series of reforms as a part of his broader efforts to centralize imperial administration and reduce senatorial influence over provincial and financial affairs. His new decree empowers imperial procurators, often members of the equestrian order or imperial freedmen, with judicial authority in financial cases to streamline governance and reinforce the emperor's control over the empire's fiscal matters. Moving to the east, where significant events are underway in the advancement of the early Christian church. Peter the Apostle has been an indispensable leader within the Christian community of the Levant, and through Jesus naming him Petros in Greek or Rock in English, and entrusting him with the keys of the kingdom, Peter was established as the foremost leader among the apostles and a foundational figure in the early church. In approximately the year 48 AD, Peter was undertaking missionary activities in the major city of Antioch. He founded the Church of Antioch and is said to have become its first bishop. Though, Peter has greater ambitions driven by his fervent beliefs and decides it is time to move on to bigger things. This year, he relinquishes his position as the Bishop of Antioch, and a man named Evodius takes up the role. Not much is known about Evodius, but he is possibly a Hellenistic Jew, and with this move, Peter is free to travel west to the heart of the empire to continue his life's mission. Further south, Emperor Claudius has ordered the restructuring of territorial holdings in the Levant. Herod Agrippa II, the son of the former king of Judea, Herod Agrippa, currently has the title of Tetrarch of Chalcis. Now, 26 years old and judged to be a competent administrator, Claudius grants him greater prestige by bestowing upon him the enhanced title of king over the territories previously governed by Philip the Tetrarch, those being Etruria, Trachonitis, Batanea, Gaulonitis, Auronitis, and Peneus, as well as the kingdom of Lysanias and Abila. Last year in the Caucasus, we saw the Parthians undertake an invasion of Armenia by the order of King Vologases to remove the Iberian Radamistus from the throne and replace him with the brother of Vologases, Tiridates. This year, the foreign army enters the city of Artaxata and drives out Radamistus along with his Iberian collaborators. The Arsacid prince Tiridates becomes the new king of Armenia, permitting the Parthians to begin the process of extending their influence further into the strategically important Caucasus region. The Romans have been observing the situation with great caution and will surely not tolerate such an outrage. In the Far East, within the Korean peninsula, King Moban of Goguryeo is still struggling to consolidate power behind his rule since becoming the king in 48 AD. He attempted to gain military prestige by raiding Han territory, but the result was a negotiated treaty between the two. Known for having a fiery and stubborn personality, he has still failed to win over many of the court officials of Goguryeo. One such official, named Duro, takes it upon himself to have Moban killed, and the risky endeavor ends in success. Moban had previously named his son Eek as the crown prince and successor to the throne, but after a power struggle, a young boy named Taizhou, at only 6 years of age, comes out on top with the more formidable backers. As the year ends, Taizhou is crowned as the 6th king of Goguryeo. This year in Rome, the relentless ambition of Agrippina the Younger, the wife of Claudius, is put on full display. Since marrying the emperor in 49 AD, all of her energy has been directed towards advancing the position of her son Nero at any cost. Claudius is known to be quite aloof when it comes to the secret affairs of his current and former wives and seems to suspect nothing. Leading up to October of this year, the couple has been much more combative to one another. Claudius openly laments his bad wives and begins to comment on his biological son Britannicus's approaching manhood with an eye towards restoring his status within the imperial family. Agrippina knows in her mind that she cannot allow this to come to pass. It's at this point that Claudius, now 63 years of age, falls seriously ill after eating mushrooms at a banquet in the imperial palace. In no time at all, the affliction takes the emperor's life. Nearly all sources implicate Agrippina the Younger, claiming that she had Claudius killed with poison mushrooms, and knowing her reputation, she did have the motive and guile to do so. Whether or not she played a role in the affair, her main objective was fulfilled. Claudius died before he could elevate Britannicus above her son, and that very same day, the 16-year-old Nero becomes the newest and youngest emperor of Rome. His tutor, Seneca the Younger, prepares Nero's first speech before the Senate. During this speech, Nero speaks about, quote, eliminating the ills of the previous regime, unquote. Quote, he promised to follow the Augustan model in his principate, to end all secret trials intra-cubiculum, to have done with the corruption of court favorites and freedmen, and above all, to respect the privileges of the Senate and individual senators." Unquote. Nero's respect for senatorial autonomy, which differs from Caligula and Claudius, is generally well received by the Roman Senate. In addition, much like every emperor since Tiberius, Nero donates a generous bonus to the Praetorian Guard. To the plebs, he awards a cash sum and pledges to lower taxes and maintain the grain supply at a stable price. However, it is quite clear that Agrippina still holds a tight grip on her son and clearly intends to rule through him. Coins minted at the beginning of his reign, typically portraying the emperor alone, unusually feature his mother alongside him. In the city of Caesarea, on the eastern Mediterranean coast, civil unrest breaks out between the resident Jews and pagans. Quote, "The Jews of Caesarea were outraged when the Greeks set up images and symbols in a synagogue, sparking bitter disputes. The Jews took up arms and assembled in the marketplace." Unquote. The armed Jews, using clubs and swords, clash with Greeks and Roman forces, while the Roman procurator, Antonius Felix, struggles to control the unrest. He sends representatives to Rome to have Emperor Nero adjudicate the civil dispute. Nero ultimately rules that the non-Jewish residents have legal civic precedence in Caesarea, and formally relegates the Jews to second-class civic status in Caesarea, denying them full participation in city governance. Elsewhere, Nero and his advisors are keeping an eye on the situation in Armenia after the yearly martial turbulence which began in 51 AD. Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo arrives in the east and takes up an assignment as governor, with a secret brief from Nero and his chief ministers, Seneca and Burrus, to return Armenia to the Roman Empire. Corbulo has distinguished himself in past years as an effective commander and administrator in Germania, defending the frontier against Germanic raiders, training local garrisons, and bolstering fortifications in a successful manner, and he will look to find similar fortune here in the east. Moving to Armenia itself, where last year we saw the Iberian prince and king of Armenia, Radamistus, being driven out by the Parthian army sent in by King Vologases. The brother of Vologases was placed on the Armenian throne and became King Tiridates, the first of his name. However, the Parthian position is highly tenuous, as the army is now facing a winter epidemic, along with a revolt beginning at home in Parthian territory itself. This situation becomes so dire that the Parthians and Tiridates are forced to withdraw from Armenia, allowing Radamistus to seize the opportunity to return. Upon his restoration, Radamistus immediately begins to punish the locals as traitors. The Armenian people are no fan of the Iberian prince and are resentful with his rule as the year ends in this part of the world. King Vologases of the Parthian Empire is left to watch helplessly as his campaign to secure influence over Armenia fails. With the added detriment of internal dissension within the Parthian court, it seems that Vologases has overplayed his hand and is in serious trouble. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Emperor Claudius, born in 10 BC, was often underestimated in his youth because of his limp, speech impediment, and awkward manner, though Augustus himself is said to have noticed his potential. Hidden from politics for much of his early life, he devoted himself to history and writing, developing a sharp intellect that few contemporaries credited. In 41 AD, after the assassination of Caligula, Claudius was unexpectedly proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard, surprising a senate that had long dismissed him as weak and unsuitable. As emperor, Claudius proved highly capable, expanding the Roman Empire more than any ruler since Augustus. His most famous military achievement was the invasion and annexation of Britannia in 43 AD, a difficult conquest that secured long-term Roman control. He also oversaw the incorporation of other territories into the empire, such as Thrace, Mauritania, and Judea. Administratively, Claudius reformed the imperial bureaucracy, extended citizenship to provincials, improved the judicial system, and built major infrastructure like aqueducts, harbors, and roads. His personal life, however, was marked by scandal. He married Agrippina the Younger in 49 AD, adopted her son Nero, and was gradually overshadowed by her ambition. In 54 AD, Claudius died after possibly eating poisoned mushrooms, with many ancient sources blaming Agrippina. Though resented by the Senate and portrayed by some historians as weak or buffoonish, Claudius was in fact a shrewd, energetic ruler whose intelligence and administrative skill left a lasting imprint on the empire. Starting off the year by catching up on the activities of the new Roman governor of Britannia, Aulus Didius Gallus. After the sudden death of Governor Publius Astorius Scapula in 52 AD, Gallus was tasked with confronting the persistent resistance of the Silures tribe in the western part of Britannia, who had humiliated the Romans with a string of recent defeats. Since that time, he has moved to consolidate the Roman position by constructing numerous forts in Roman-controlled territory. Notably this year, the fort of Tamium is built, which looks to be in a strategic position for further excursions across the front. Around the same time, conflict erupts across the northern frontier within the Brigantes tribe, longtime allies of Rome. They are currently ruled by Queen Cartimandua, who has been reigning for over 10 years at this point. The late rebel Briton king Caratacus attempted to seek refuge with her after being defeated by the Romans, but as a friend of Rome, she handed him over in chains. Since that time, Cartimandua's husband, Venutius, has taken command of the rebel resistance of Roman occupation. Cartimandua has apparently tired of him and decides to marry his armor-bearer Vellocatus, whom she elevates to the kingship in Venutius's place. Initially, Venutius seeks only to overthrow his ex-wife, only to later turn his attention to her imperial allies. In turn, the Romans come to the aid of their client queen, and Venutius's revolt rages on as the year ends. In Rome itself, Nero and his mother Agrippina are celebrating an early victory in his young reign. Before Nero's accession, Agrippina was worried that Claudius would move to replace Nero as his heir with his biological son, Britannicus. Fortunately for Nero and Agrippina, the emperor suspiciously passed away before he could make concrete steps. At 13 years of age, Britannicus still remains the greatest threat to Nero's right to rule. In the last year, the new emperor has constantly worked to undermine the public image of Britannicus. Those attempts were not met with much success, and he decides to resort to more fatal means. At a dinner party, attended by his sister Octavia, Agrippina, and several other notables, Nero plots to have Britannicus poisoned to death. Tacitus's account of the event is that Britannicus was given a hot drink, which was tested by a food taster, and when he asked for it to be cooled, the poison was added to it with the cold water. The substance was instantly effective, and he, quote, lost alike both voice and breath, unquote. The next day, the boy's body is buried secretly with no ceremony, and with the death of young Britannicus, Nero and Agrippina triumph yet again. In other matters, Nero begins to turn his attention to the arts. This year, quote, Nero imported the foremost lyre player in the empire to give him lessons, and commenced a rigorous regimen to develop his singing techniques as well, unquote. Suetonius notes, quote, ultimately, though his voice was feeble and husky, he was pleased enough with his progress to begin to nurse theatrical ambitions, unquote. Last year in Armenia, we saw the Iberian prince Radamistus taking back the throne from Tiridates, who was placed there by the Parthians. When Radamistus returned to Armenia, he immediately began to punish the locals who collaborated against him. In turn, an uprising against his rule breaks out this year, and he is ousted yet again. Tiridates, the brother of King Vologases of the Parthian Empire, takes advantage of the chaos and is now restored to the throne once again. Radamistus is able to escape along with his wife Zenobia, who is currently pregnant. But unable to continue the Great Escape, she asks her husband to end her life so she cannot be captured. Putting his ruthless side on full display, Radamistus stabs her with a dagger and flings her body into the river Araxes. Surprisingly, Zenobia is not fatally injured and is recovered by shepherds who send her to Tiridates. With Tiridates back on top, he will have to keep a close eye on the hardened Roman general Corbulo, who was stationed in the eastern Roman provinces the prior year by Emperor Nero. For now at least, no orders to intervene have been given. Further south, the Parthian king Vologases ought to be pleased with events unfolding in Armenia, yet troubles at home soon distract him. A member of the Arsacid dynasty and his own son, Vardanes, rebels against his father from his base in Seleucia. He moves to Ecbatana, where he takes control and begins to mint coins of his own. The interfamilial rebellion continues as the year ends in Parthia. Moving to the Korean peninsula, where the kingdom of Goguryeo is hard at work developing their territory. The court of the young King Taizhou orders the construction of a fortress in the west, along the border with the Han dynasty. The two states have fought fierce battles against one another over the years, and these fortifications look to protect Goguryeo against future incursions. We will kick off this year in Rome with the contentious relationship between Nero and his mother Agrippina reaching a breaking point. Nero has grown weary of his mother's influence and her constant interference in his rule. It is said that, early in his reign, he feared her, but over time, he came to recognize the true extent of his own power. In turn, she is forced out of the palace by Nero to live in the imperial residence, Villa Antonia, in Misenum. Despite these actions, Agrippina still, for the time being, retains some degree of influence over her son. Now it's time to catch up with the missionary activities of Paul the Apostle. Last time we heard from him, he had completed his second missionary journey, wherein he traveled through parts of Asia Minor and into Greece, establishing churches in cities like Philippi, Thessalonica, and Corinth. He was joined by several notable companions such as Timothy, Silas, and Luke, and focused on preaching to both Jews and Gentiles, or non-Jews, while strengthening the early Christian communities in the region. And approximately this year, currently in the midst of his third missionary journey, he writes one of his famous letters, his second epistle to the Corinthians, possibly while in Philippi. An epistle is a formal letter or written communication, often with moral, philosophical, or religious content. In the case of the second epistle to the Corinthians, it is a formal letter written by the Apostle Paul to the Christian community in Corinth, addressing theological issues, offering personal reflections, and providing guidance and encouragement in their faith. Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians, written around 53 to 54 AD, addressed divisions, moral issues, and questions about Christian life and worship, offering firm correction and practical guidance to a troubled church. In contrast, his second epistle is more personal and emotional, defending his apostleship, expressing deep concern for the community, and urging reconciliation and generosity. Just to the east, the Romans and General Corbulo continue to watch carefully as the Game of Thrones unfolds in Armenia. Corbulo was stationed in the region 2 years prior, and continues to make preparations for a possible intervention. But for now, King Tiridates still has control of Armenia with the backing of the Parthians, despite losing the throne during his first short year-long reign. Far to the east, the kingdom of Goguryeo continues its aggressive expansionist strategy. We saw their now 9-year-old king Taizhou come to the throne in 53 AD after a power struggle in the aftermath of the assassination of King Moban. Goguryeo has been methodically annexing the minor states on their border for decades at this point, and now the target is placed on Okja to their southeast. Without much resistance, Okja is forced to become a tributary to Goguryeo. Even with a boy king on the throne, Goguryeu's creeping borders continue their relentless and methodical push outward. We pick back up in Britannia, where 2 years ago we saw the revolt of the Briton noble Venutius against the Romans. His wife, Cartamandua, queen of the Brigantes, remained loyal to the Romans, aiding in their effort to put an end to the rebellion of her disaffected husband. This year, after a conservatively run campaign, the Roman commander, Caesius Nasica, finally defeats Venutius, though his life is spared. After being humiliated, first by his wife Cartamandua's rejection, and then by his defeat at the hands of the Romans, sparing his life may yet prove to be a costly mistake. In political affairs, Aulus Didius Gallus is relieved of his moderately successful governorship of Britannia and is replaced by Quintus Veranius. He gets quickly to work by reversing Didius's policy of maintaining existing borders and begins military operations against the troublesome Silures. Though he does not get to see his ambitious plans come to fruition, as he suddenly dies within the year. At this point in time, the governorship will remain vacant until an appropriate successor can be selected. Moving across continental Europe, where Paul the Apostle has completed his third missionary journey. This third journey began around 52 AD as he traveled through Galatia and Phrygia to strengthen the church. He spent over 2 years in Ephesus, teaching and debating daily, which led to the spread of the gospel throughout Asia Minor. Afterward, he traveled through Macedonia and Greece, including a 3-month stay in Corinth, while collecting donations for the church in Jerusalem. Over the course of the journey, he also wrote important letters with his epistles to the Corinthians and the Romans. On his return journey, he stopped in Miletus to speak with the Ephesian elders before heading to Jerusalem to deliver the collection for the poor that he amassed. But trouble awaits him. In the Holy City, a group of Jews from Asia Minor accuse him of bringing Gentiles into the temple, which they consider a defilement. A violent mob forms, but Roman soldiers intervene to prevent a riot, taking Paul into custody. When threatened with flogging by a Roman tribune, he asserts, quote, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?" Unquote. After further questioning, he exclaims, quote, "I was born a citizen," unquote, halting the proceedings and preventing corporal punishment under Roman law. Paul is a Roman citizen by birth, likely because his father or an earlier ancestor had been granted citizenship by Roman authorities for service or loyalty to Rome. Afterward, Paul is brought before the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish judicial and religious council composed of elders, and later transferred to Caesarea for his safety. In China, Emperor Guangwu of Han is receiving envoys from a distant and mysterious island across the water. Tribute is sent from the King of Na, hailing from the large island known at this time as Wa. Nothing else is known of this king besides the message provided by his envoys, but the region he hails from is currently dominated by the Yayoi culture, significant for their development of agricultural societies, increased use of iron tools, and the expansion of social hierarchies. In the end, Emperor Guangwu accepts their tribute and grants them a golden seal, recognizing Wa's authority and confirming their diplomatic relationship. Unfortunately for the Han, this will be one of their great emperor's last acts, for in this year he dies at the age of 62 after a 32-year reign, where he successfully restored the Han dynasty, reunited China after the fall of the Qin dynasty, and suppressed countless revolts. Crown Prince Liu Zhuang, the favorite of Guangwu, who has already shown a knack for diplomacy and strategy, takes up the mantle of his father and becomes Emperor Ming of the Han dynasty. Ming sets to work immediately, endeavoring to stamp out corrupt officials and improve the empire's administration. Although the empire seems to be in good hands, factions within the court continue to contest each other within the levels of bureaucracy. In courtly affairs, Emperor Ming selects the daughter of the deceased general Ma Yuan as his empress, reviving somewhat the power of the Ma faction to the dismay of the Dou faction, who conspired against Ma Yuan. Also, within the imperial family, trouble arises for Ming as his half-brother Liu Ying tries to incite his other half-brother to rebel. Emperor Ming swiftly and quietly puts an end to the affair. His brother is spared, but Liu Ying is unbothered and carries on with his nefarious ways. To immediately begin to consolidate his power and gain allies, quote, the emperor bestowed posthumous honors upon the meritorious ministers who had aided Emperor Guangwu in restoring the Han, conferring noble titles upon their descendants, unquote. This act symbolizes dynastic gratitude and continuity, linking Ming's reign to his father's legitimacy. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Emperor Guangwu of Han, born Liu Xiu in 5 BC, was the legendary restorer of the Han dynasty. He was a descendant of Emperor Jing of the Han dynasty and grew up as a minor noble from Nanyang during the chaos following Wang Mong's Xin dynasty usurpation. He joined his kinsman Liu Yan's rebellion against the Xin dynasty in 22 AD. After the death of Liu Yan, Liu Xiu took command and distinguished himself by defeating Wang Mong's forces at the Battle of Kunyang, a decisive victory that paved the way for Han restoration. In 25 AD, he proclaimed himself emperor at Luoyang, re-establishing the imperial order after years of civil war. Emperor Guangwu consolidated power gradually, defeating many rivals such as Liu Yang, Gongsun Shu, the Lu Lin and Red Eyebrows rebels, and the Trung sisters in the south. He unified China by 36 AD after subduing these warlords running rampant across the empire. His rule emphasized leniency, economic recovery, and administrative efficiency, reviving the Han institutions dismantled under Wang Mong. He was known for his humility, diligence, and preference for merit over birth, earning him a reputation as one of China's most capable and pragmatic rulers. Emperor Guangwu reigned until his death in 57 AD, leaving a stable and prosperous dynasty and the mandate of heaven to one of his many sons, the newly crowned Emperor Ming. Starting off in Britain, where the new governor of Britannia is chosen after months of vacancy. The selection is Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, who previously held provincial command in Mauritania during the revolt of the early 40s AD. Paulinus's goals reflect that of the previous short-lived governor, Quintus Veranius, who staunchly believed that the aggressively defiant Silures needed to be dealt with as soon as possible. Conflict once again looks to be on the horizon on this island. In Rome, Emperor Nero is coming forward with ideas to improve his favorability. He proposes the abolition of customs duties and indirect taxes, aiming to reduce the tax burden on the populace. He's attempting to promote freer trade and relief for the poor. However, faced with opposition from the Senate and concerns about fiscal collapse, he's unable to fully eliminate these taxes. In the end, they convince the inexperienced administrator that it would bankrupt the treasury, and he relents. On a more personal note for Nero, the impulsive and faithless side within him begins to bubble closer to the surface. Poppaea Sabina is a prominent Roman noblewoman in her late 20s who is well known in the Eternal City for her beauty. She is currently married to a man named Rufrius Crispinus, but has been having affairs not just with Emperor Nero, but also his friend Marcus Salvius Otho. Nero is no fan of Crispinus and orders Poppaea Sabina to divorce him and marry Otho. However, not long after, Nero's jealousy consumes him with thoughts of Otho's beauty and youth, and suspects him of greater intimacy with Poppaea. Shortly thereafter, he also orders this couple to get divorced. To rid himself of his former friend and companion, he appoints Otho as the governor of the Roman province of Lusitania on the far edge of the Iberian Peninsula. Nero's recent personal life is marked not only by romantic turbulence, but also by the continued watchfulness and criticism of his mother, Agrippina the Younger. As their relationship has grown more hostile over the last couple years, Nero gradually began to deprive his mother of honors and power, and even removed her bodyguards, while also expelling her from the capital, forcing her to live in her villa in Misenum. Here, Agrippina allegedly conspires with rebellious Plautus and other senators to overthrow Nero. As Nero becomes increasingly frantic and compulsive, she must remain vigilant, for he has shown he will go to great lengths to eliminate anything that threatens the decadent life he craves. Across the Roman frontier in the north, the rivalry between two Germanic tribes reaches its boiling point, that being the Catti and Hermunduri. Their border disputes in recent times have led to a relationship strained to its limits. This year, they clash violently over control of a sacred river, and the Hermunduri slaughter every Catti warrior who opposes them, emerging decisively victorious. They also win control of valuable salt reserves along the riverbanks. The fighting continues on into the summer, but ultimately the Catti are forced into submission. With so many warlike tribes packed into a small region, rivalries and conflicts are inevitable. In the Caucasus, chaos continues to reign supreme. During spring, Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, the Roman commander in the east, launches an invasion of Armenia from Cappadocia to drive out Parthian influence in the crucially strategic client kingdom. He leads a Roman army against the fortress of Volendam, where after a siege of 8 hours, Corbulo takes the city. The legionnaires massacre the defenders and plunder Volendam to their heart's content. Without much delay, Corbulo marches on the major Armenian city of Artaxata, while their allies, Pharasmanes of Iberia and his army from the north, and Antiochus IV of Commagene from the southwest attack and support. The inhabitants of the city weigh their options and decide to open the gates as the Parthian-backed king Tiridates flees. His brother and ally, King Vologases of the Parthian Empire, is eager to support the relief effort, but his forces are tied down, suppressing a new revolt among the Hyrcanians. Despite the swift submission of the residents of Artaxata, Corbulo gives them a few hours to collect their valuables and burns the city to the ground. Corbulo first distinguished himself as a commander along the northeastern frontier opposite the Germanic tribes, but now, with this great achievement under his belt, he is on his way to having one of the most impressive military records of any Roman general in the past century. Back in Rome, the jubilant Emperor Nero, receiving the good news, has his own candidate for the Armenian throne crowned in the Eternal City. This man takes the regnal name of Tigranes VI and will act to restore Rome's influence over Armenia after being raised in the capital. Tigranes has noble blood as he is of the Herodian dynasty, which includes deceased prominent figures such as Herod Antipas and Herod the Great, of whom he is a descendant. To defend and protect Armenia, Nero gives to Tigranes a guard of 1,000 legionary soldiers, 3 auxiliary cohorts, and 2 wings of horses. 3 years prior, we witnessed a member of the noble Arsacid dynasty of Parthia named Vardanes rising up in interfamilial rebellion against his father, King Vologases. He immediately moved to the city of Ecbatana and asserted control of the surrounding territory, wherein he began to mint coins of his own to legitimize his claim as the real king of the empire. This year, Vologases can breathe a sigh of relief as the rebellion finally comes to an end. The exact outcome of this father-son saga is unknown, but in the end, coins claiming Vardanes as king stopped being minted in this year, so most likely he was either killed or captured. Over in China, an atypical state funeral is being arranged. This year, the half-brother of Emperor Ming and former crown prince Liu Jiang passes away. Upon his death, Emperor Ming orders that all the princes and major officials attend the funeral at Lucheng. Ordinarily, princes and high officials would not attend funerals held outside the capital, especially for someone who is not currently reigning. Their attendance reflects respect and legitimacy, as well as Emperor Ming's desire to treat his older brother with honor, even though he had been displaced as heir by Emperor Guangwu. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Radamistus was the son of Pharasmanes, king of Iberia. Ambitious and ruthless, he usurped the Armenian throne in 51 AD by invading the country with his father's support and murdered his uncle Mithridates, who had ruled as a Roman client king. His reign was marked by cruelty and instability, quickly alienating both the Armenian nobility and the local population. He was knocked off the throne once by the Parthians, but returned, only to lose it once again. He was forced to flee back to Iberia, and there, according to Tacitus, he was later executed by his own father after being accused of plotting rebellion. In Rome, the strained relationship between Emperor Nero and his mother, Agrippina the Younger, finally reaches a breaking point. Agrippina had been instrumental in Nero's rise to power through her marriage to Emperor Claudius and her role in Nero's adoption. Over time, Nero became disaffected with his mother and sent her away to live in Misenum. At this point, Nero possibly finds evidence or hears rumors that she is conspiring against him with members of the Senate. In the end, Nero's lover, Poppaea Sabina, is said to have been the one who finally convinces him to dispose of his mother once and for all. Quote, Nero chose a typically flamboyant method for the assassination, rigging a ship to collapse while transporting Agrippina across the Bay of Neapolis, so her death would look like a sailing accident. Although the boat played its part commendably enough, disintegrating right on cue, Agrippina managed to clutch a piece of driftwood and swim safely to shore. Unquote. Nero is stunned when he hears word of her survival. In a flurry of panic, he orders the commander of the fleet at Misenum to finish the job. That man, Anicetus, enters the room of Agrippina with several of his officers and puts her to death by sword. The public message that Nero puts out is that his mother had committed suicide after she had tried and failed to assassinate him. Most of the Roman public are just glad to hear of the emperor's good fortune, though privately, many doubt the official narrative. Nero, already unstable and deeply troubled, must now grapple with the consequences of having ordered the death of his own mother, a woman to whom he was once deeply attached and thoroughly dominated by. The immediate reaction among the Senate, nobility, and aristocracy of Rome is of shock, as few could believe the story, and most dared not to speak against it. In a lone act of defiance, the senator, Publius Claudius Thrasea Pietus, openly shows his disgust at what occurred after the emperor's letter justifying the death of Agrippina had been read, and various motions congratulating Nero were proposed. Senatorial procedure required each individual in turn to give his opinion on the motion, and Thrasea chose to walk out of the meeting, quote, since he could not say what he would and would not say what he could, unquote. A significant case of civil crisis breaks out just south of Rome this year. Tacitus explains, quote, a quarrel arose between the colonists of New Syria and the inhabitants of Pompeii during a gladiatorial show given by Livius Regulus, a former senator. At first with abuse, then with stones, finally with arms they attacked each other. Many of the new Syrians were carried to Rome with wounds, and some lost their lives. The Senate, at the emperor's request, forbade the Pompeians to hold such shows for 10 years, and dissolved the illegal associations that had caused the disturbance, unquote. Checking back in on Paul the Apostle, who he saw being imprisoned in Jerusalem. He was sent to Caesarea, where he has remained in custody under unspecified charges for the last 2 years. Back then, a violent mob led by prominent Jewish nobles targeted him after accusing him of bringing Gentiles into the temple, which they considered a defilement. The Romans took him into custody and threatened to flog him before he revealed to them that he is a Roman citizen, which affords him more rights than his non-citizen counterparts. He eventually appears before two Roman procurators, Antonius Felix and then his replacement, Porcius Festus, both incapable of understanding the intricacies of this bewildering religious dispute. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish council of elders, come to Caesarea at the request of Festus and accuse Paul of serious offenses. Paul once again invokes his right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar, also known as Emperor Nero, which obligates the authorities to send him to Rome for trial before the emperor. Before his departure, Festus presents the case to the Roman client king Herod Agrippa II and his sister Berenice. Paul delivers a charismatic and convincing speech recounting his spiritual journey, to which Herod reportedly responds, quote, "You almost persuade me to be a Christian," unquote. In the end, Paul's request is granted as is Roman law, and preparations are made to send him to the heart of the empire to plead his case. Last we left off in chaotic Armenia, the Romans under commander Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo drove Tiridates and his supporters out of the major city of Artaxata. This year, he continues on and also takes the Armenian capital of Tigranocerta after heavy local resistance and spirited raids from the forces of Tiridates. After being crowned in Rome by Nero last year, Tigranes VI and his military entourage finally arrive in Armenia, where he is installed by Corbulo and takes up his throne in Tigranocerta to begin his Roman-backed rule. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Agrippina the Younger, born in 15 AD, was the daughter of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, and the sister of Emperor Caligula. Exiled under Tiberius and later recalled, she survived the turbulence of Caligula's reign and rose to prominence during the rule of her uncle, Emperor Claudius, whom she married in 49 AD. Through political skill and ambition, she secured the adoption of her son Nero as Claudius's heir, becoming one of the most powerful women in Roman history thus far. As empress, she exerted significant influence over the early years of Nero's reign, but their relationship deteriorated as he sought independence. Nero ultimately ordered her assassination in 59 AD, ending the life of a woman whose ambition, intellect, and political acumen shaped the course of the empire. This year in Britannia, the Romans continue their slow and steady advancement of their frontiers on the island in two locations, the first being in Dumnonia, where the strides in that direction were initiated by Titus Flavius Vespasianus, who had previously been stationed there. Approximately around this time, the Romans advanced beyond the fort of Isca Dumnoniorum, extending their control far enough for the region to be considered broadly under Roman rule. Further north, the Romans turned toward the island of Mona, the last major stronghold of the Druids, which is also used by some rebellious Britons as a base of operations. The Druids are an educated priestly class of the ancient Celtic people, serving as religious leaders, judges, teachers, and keepers of sacred knowledge across Iron Age Britain and Gaul, and have been driven to the brink of extinction by the Romans. Quote, "As the Roman troops crossed the shallow straits to the island of Mona, they could see them on the shore, rows of women dressed wholly in black with long unkempt hair falling about their faces, brandishing burning torches and keening eerily like the furies of ancient legend. Alongside stood the Druid priests, lifting their hands and their voices skyward to invoke hideous-sounding curses and the wrath of their nameless gods upon the invaders." Unquote. Unsurprisingly, the Romans are caught off guard at the bizarre scene before them, and as they disembark from their ships, they warily prepare for battle. They are whipped back into shape by their commander, the governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, who shouts insults at his men who are frightened. The legions rush forward, easily breaking through the lines of the defenders. Further resistance continues inland, but the Druids are eventually forced to surrender and offer tribute in the form of slaves and other treasures. The jubilant commander Paulinus orders the torching of their sacred groves when he hears the shocking news coming from the main island. In 47 AD, we saw the Iceni tribe rising up in revolt when the former Roman governor Scapula demanded that they hand over their arms. The rebellion was put down, but the Iceni remained nominally independent, and a pro-Roman ruler was possibly installed to prevent further uprisings. This year, that same king, Prasutagus, dies, and in his will agrees to name the Roman emperor as co-monarch of the Iceni's territory, hoping that this gesture would prevent them from fully annexing his land. Quote, "Alas, his Roman overlords completely ignored his request. Instead, the Iceni aristocracy was dispossessed of its hereditary estates by provincial military officials, and the slaves of Roman settlers were permitted to plunder Prasutagus' personal property. The king's widow, Boudica, was flogged and his daughters raped." Unquote. The atrocities predictably incensed the local Iceni populace and that of the surrounding tribes. Queen Boudica responds by organizing an armed uprising with the help of the Trinovantes and other neighboring minor tribes. In the late spring or early summer, Boudica advances on the capital of Roman Britain, Camulodunum, with her vengeful force of nearly 50,000 Briton warriors. With the main Roman army of Britannia still on the island of Mona, the colony is barely protected. In a matter of hours, the Boudican army tramples the small garrison and puts Camulodunum to the torch. The retreating Roman soldiers and civilians hole up in a stone temple dedicated to Claudius for 2 days before being overcome by the Britons and completely slaughtered. Stationed elsewhere, the 9th Roman Legion also emerges from their winter quarters to meet the Briton army outside Camulodunum with horrible results. 2,000 Roman infantrymen are cut down and the rest are forced to flee. The rebels go on to burn other major Roman settlements like Londinium, which Paulinus, who has now arrived, fails to defend, and Verulamium. In retreat, it seems that Governor Paulinus is faced with the largest threat to Roman rule in Britannia since the initial invasion of 43 AD. Will he cement his legacy with a victorious response, or become another name like Varus, known infamously for his devastating defeat at the Teutoburg Forest? Last year, we saw Paul the Apostle being sent on his way to Rome after calling on his right as a Roman citizen and demanding a legal audience with Emperor Nero himself. The ship departs, containing Paul along with several other prisoners and a military guard. After a layover on the island of Crete, the journey resumes. They are struck with a violent gale and become shipwrecked on the island of Melita or Malta. He stays for 3 months and uses his rhetorical skills to convert a man named Publius to Christianity. Eventually, before year's end, he arrives in Rome where he receives a warm welcome from the fledgling Christian community and is placed under house arrest, but still allowed to receive visitors and continues to write his evangelical letters. We surely have not heard the last from him. Around the same time, his apostolic counterpart, none other than Peter, is finally reaching Rome. Last we heard from him, he vacated his title of Bishop of Antioch in 53 AD and started slowly making his way west in a meandering fashion. Not a whole lot is known about his activities during this period, but he continued his own missionary activities in places like Judea, Syria, and Asia Minor before making his way west. With so many influential Christian missionaries landing in the imperial city, the emperor is sure to take notice, and with Emperor Nero's reign becoming more and more cruel, nothing good can come from it. Returning to the Kushans for the first time since we saw the various principalities of the Uaji people come under a confederation under the control of one leader, Kajula Codphizes. The Uaji people originally lived north and west of the Gobi Desert in the 3rd and 2nd century BC, but were forced to migrate to the region of Bactria over the course of the next 200 years. After Codpheses succeeded in unifying these peoples under his authority, the region entered a period of greatly increased prosperity and power. Now the Kushans are ready to expand beyond their newly established home of Bactria. They turn towards the prosperous territory of Gandhara, which contains the rich city of Taxila and is currently controlled by an Indo-Parthian ruler. In approximately this year, the Kushans begin to attack these lands with the goal of not just simply plundering the rich cities, but also strategically expanding into an empire. Also around this time, under the leadership of Kajula Codpheses, the Kushans are able to fully integrate and annex the territory of Dayuan to their northeast. Dayuan was an independent Hellenized kingdom centered in the Fergana Valley and was founded by settlers from the Greco-Bactrian kingdom in the 3rd century BC. Control of Dayuan gives the Kushans direct access to the Silk Road through Kashgar and the Tarim Basin. The peoples of the Indian subcontinent and the Indus Valley appear unprepared for the impending storm of military power that is about to sweep towards them. And that completes the history of the 6th decade AD. If you're curious about what happens next, please like and subscribe to follow the series in the future.